G'day, I'm Ash. Welcome back to another War Thunder video. Today's topic has been talked about often with regards to battle rating decompression, but generally has failed to look at the underlying issues regarding War Thunder, that being power creep. Now, whether you disagree with me on this particular subject, I'm going to explain some certain reasonings here and to why. But first, the definition of power creep is defined as a certain flaw in a video game where content released down the line gets more powerful over time, which in turn, basically leaves older content practically underpowered or in a terrible spot balance-wise. Taking this comparison to War Thunder and how it balances vehicles, one could basically deduce or assume that power creep should not even be a bloody problem at all. However, that is simply not true. Even if a vehicle's battle rating can be changed or its repair cost and rewards can be modified, it still begs the question, is there power creep in War Thunder? And, well, most certainly the answer is yes. But first, a history lesson. Back in my day, in patch 1.21 all the way back in 2013, there was a rank system called a tier, basically a new level at which certain vehicles sat similar to what we have today, but without the battle rating system. There were 20 ranks, and vehicles were set to this rank as a part of a wider tech tree. Back in those days, there was certainly less things to look at. Ground Forces and Naval were certainly only but a dream, and at that point in time, the only game modes available were arcade, historical battles, and simulator battles. But back then, the game was primarily focused around aviation. And in patch 1.7 is where we got the battle rating system that we know and love today. Despite all its problems and the extra tiers that have been added from 1 to 5 to 1 to 7, I guess there are a multitude of different issues you could tackle regarding power creep. Is it the addition of new vehicles and new premium vehicles that ruin the existing matchmaker for older vehicles, for example the 262 versus the F89D? Or is it the fact that you need thermals in night battles in order to be, into the introduction of mass night battles in order to be effective, and upgrading your vehicles with night vision was often a necessity in order to compete? Or is it the fact that you constantly have missiles that are getting better, or the fact that we don't have chaffs or flares for aircraft, and the fact that you can't always pay attention to your direction with all aspect, rear aspect missiles? Even if you're not using an afterburner, well, you can't really be ready for every scenario because not every aircraft has radar warning receivers either. So, I guess there's a convoluted situation here where Gaijin really have put themselves on the back foot, and power creep is really the new normal. When did power creep really start in War Thunder is the biggest question here. And I'd probably estimate around the time the XM1 was added. Although you can usually estimate the fact that there always has been a better vehicle or a vehicle of the meta, that usually destroys a player's interest, and mass players flock to those particular vehicles because they, well, not only do they do well on those vehicles, but everybody is playing them, so it creates this reverse effect where everybody is playing a slightly broken vehicle, and now you have matchmakers filled with these vehicles. For example, Harriers, for example, R320s, M18s, for example, as well. The list is basically endless. Essentially, it's extremely prevalent in War Thunder, and power creep is being found in both tank battles and air battles, and everyone screams about wanting their nation to have a brand new MBT without thinking of the balance implications. It even affects just generally the whole entire game, as the whole entire game is basically just power creep in a way. As an example, for a long time after they were introduced, Tier 6 premium MBTs basically destroyed competition, and God. Looking back on War Thunder's history, there has been plenty of examples of things being more broken than the other, and the primary objective of this is probably to drive sales, or to get mass majority of people to be playing those vehicles. As a result, these vehicles tend to be really good after release, and then some months down the line they finally get to patching these vehicles, but it's too little too late, as it takes Gaijin too long even with bug reports. Even at the rise of vehicles or the release of vehicles, it is going to take them several months for them to change anything, and I guess this is really the overall arching problem. Don't get me started on the KA-50 and the helicopter issue that caused a mass uproar regarding close air support within War Thunder. See, all these issues feed off other problems that are already existing in the game, and it becomes an absolute catalyst for disaster. If you only solve one thing, the economy, battle ratings, they'll only solve half the problems within the game. Because even with top-tier jets, avoiding missiles can be a particular pain in the rear. Now, if you want a video telling you how to avoid missiles, watch this video by Zetaris. It's going to be linked in the description. But the Jaguar should have flares. The Q-5A should have flares and air-to-air missiles. The Harriers all should have air pods, and Gaijin is effectively directing people to certain vehicles with more features than others, and they're also limiting vehicles that should have these capabilities in the fucking first place. And it's really unfortunate because as soon as a vehicle is released, Gaijin pretty much loses interest because they have to constantly add new stuff to make money, which is basically the major problem with War Thunder. By leaving new vehicles in somewhat a broken state, in an overpowered state, it basically incentivizes players to use those vehicles, right? Which drives the numbers up, and players then spend money in order to reach that vehicle faster. So how do you stop power creep? Maybe the addition of having vehicles of equivalent nations. For example, when top-tier jets were introduced, the supersonics, why didn't every nation get an equivalent of the Electric Lightning? Or why wasn't the Electric Lightning added earlier with the addition to the F1 F4s? It's because the vehicle model wasn't ready yet. But if Gaijin really produces content 2 years in advance, which is likely based on the sources that I know have told me, essentially what happens is they produce content well in advance and you get this recurring effect of, well, they're not actually implementing the technology at the same time, creating this forced meta, which then plays at a hand into a lot of the problems we see at top tier. But it's not just at top tier that is limited to this factor at all. Everything that gets added eventually, for example, the new SK60B, an utter bloody monster that thing is, but it really can only counter the F-89Ds, which again were the problem in the bloody first place because they were a premium that were destroying the 262s. God forbid, let's not talk about the ME-163's battle rating at 8.7. So power creep won't go away. But if they implemented a patch where every nation got the equivalent tech of some new game mechanic that they added, they wouldn't have this issue at all. We wouldn't have people complaining that they didn't have this shell, that they wouldn't have this particular vehicle, because every nation would have had that from the get-go. But that's how they get us. They trickle feed us content on a regular basis to keep us playing. And power creep will always exist in War Thunder to a certain extent. And it's just a travesty, in my opinion, because there's so many things you could do to alleviate the problem. But after all, Gaijin is a small family business, and you know what they say about small family businesses. Eventually, they become large businesses. My name is Ash. Catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.